So, my talk today is who is your person? The power of connection in the workplace. And so, these are the 8 dimensions of wellness that have been identified by the Substance Abuse Services Administration. For those of you that are familiar with that organization, we hear it called SAMHSA. And what they have said is that these are the 8 areas within our lives that help us stay well. And Amber pointed out this morning how they're all interconnected, and she's so very right. So that's why this cyclical graphic is so helpful, because when one of those dimensions start to become unwell, we become unwell. I am specifically talking today about the intersectionality of emotional, social, and occupational well-being. So I'm going to give you a quick definition of social well-being. You can read, so I'm not going to read that to you. But looking at those 3 circles on the bottom, these are just some examples of things that you can do within that social dimension. It is really about helping you perform your social roles effectively, but also comfortably, and creating that support network. We've done a lot of networking here throughout the day, and I've watched as you all have done that, even those of us that may be introverts and have stepped outside of our comfort zones and done so. But that dimension also allows us to not only develop our relationships with peers, but also those intimate relationships with romantic partners. So in the workplace, when we think about social well-being, it generally refers to the extent to which an employee feels that sense of belonging at work. Many of us are in the workplaces that we're in because we were drawn to that company and what they stood for, right? It aligned with our personal values. But oftentimes what happens as the work gets in the way and life starts lifing, as my girls like to say, we start to find that gap drifting away. And so when we think about our relationship with colleagues, right, we want to be in alignment with those company values. Our social well-being is about feeling valued as a person, as a colleague, and as an employee. And so when we think about all of the transitions that we've experienced over the last few years, especially with the increase in hybrid and remote workplaces, social connection and social well-being is even more important. So I invite you to think about today, who is your person? We all have our besties. So I want you to reflect on who your people are in your circles. We all have our besties. My husband has what he calls his work wife, and she's a dear friend of ours that I'm like, yes, that is your lane, because you talk about stuff to him I don't have the energy for sometimes. And so thank you, right? And so I invite you to think about who are the folks in your life. So I'm going to start with this question around 3 sets of friend groups that I've resonated with over my life. How many Sesame Street fans? Raise your hands. Raise them high. All right. Bert had Ernie. Right? Lion King fans? You better raise it. Timon had Pumbaa. They were always together. Now, where are my original, not this new 50 season stuff, but my original Grey's Anatomy fan? You know what I'm talking about. Christina had Meredith. Right? And so as you think about that, look at these relationships, ask yourself, have you ever been struggling to find who your person is? And so my hope is that as we go through this journey today, I will help you think about how you can identify your person. And so asking yourself as we continue the conversation, who is your person? How many of you are familiar with this loneliness report that came out from the Surgeon General? I know it was mentioned in a couple of sessions I was in. The fact that the Surgeon General has issued a report in May 2023 that says loneliness is a problem, right, just stood out to me. And what he has said is that even though there's an increase in loneliness in personal relationships, we're seeing a greater increase in loneliness in the workplace. And so one of the things that I want you to think about today is, are you seeing loneliness in your workplace, and how are you working strategically, right? Because you can't just throw spaghetti at a wall thinking, okay, I'm making it work because I'm checking a box. But how are you thinking strategically about addressing loneliness in the workplace? So let's talk about what social connection is. It's this fancy term. What does it mean? You are in the center of this. And so it is about those relationships and those interactions that you have with your friends, your family members, and your coworkers. It's those people that help you develop your sense of belonging and connection, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in your personal circles. But it also includes three major components that we see here: structure, and that's really about how many people and what is the variety of relationships that I have. That's the circle size. Are they married or are they single? Whatever the case may be. Someone asked me earlier in one of the sessions, how do I stay connected? Because as an entrepreneur, it gets really lonely, right? So if I'm not working with a client, I'm sitting at my house doing work. And one of the things that I am intentional about is I have different friend groups. I have a set of friends from when I used to work in state government. We talk about certain topics. I have friends from a mommy's online group that I met 15 years ago when my girls were small that we talk about other topics. Then I have those childhood friends that even though we haven't seen each other in 2 or 3 years, we pick up just like we left off yesterday. And so thinking about those components, right, thinking about the function of those friend groups. To which degree do those relationships serve your needs? Maybe it's a mentorship, right? Maybe it's emotional support. I had a friend a couple weeks ago, and this is connected to the function. I lost my father-in-law in March and my mother-in-law in April. Life has been lifing. And one of my friends reached out to me and she's like, wait a minute, I see you posted on LinkedIn, you're doing all this stuff. Are you resting? And I was like, girl, yeah. She's like, no, ma'am. Sit down. And I appreciated that because I was like, I got to keep going. And even though I talk the talk, in that moment, I forgot to walk the walk. And so thinking about that friend group for that function, the relationship where folks, whether it's a coworker or a friend, where they can call you out and be like, no, rest, stop, take care of yourself. And then the quality of those relationships. Are they positive? Are they negative? Because now I have friends that sometimes I just have to say, you know what? I got to separate myself from you for a while because you're doing too much. I love you, but the stuff that you're dealing with and the stuff that's coming from you is disturbing my peace. And in this moment, my peace is more important. So think about the quality of those relationships. Are they causing strain? Are they causing social inclusion or social exclusion? So evaluating, and there's nothing wrong with evaluating friendships. We all change as we grow older, as we learn, right? And so evaluating those because they do impact our well-being. And so again, I ask you, who is your person? All right, so Ruby, it sounds good. You're talking about connection. You're talking about relationships with family and friends. Why does it matter at work? Stick with me on this journey, and I'll tell you why it matters. So this particular slide lists 4 areas that we're going to talk a little bit deeper about today. And so think about the connection and the sense of belonging that you feel when you've engaged with volunteer activities through Activate Good or other organizations that you're connected with. When you're looking for a job, right, does an organization's corporate social responsibility program draw you to them? Businesses want to be successful. Oops, I went too far. They want to be successful, and they want their employees to be engaged. Out of all of my clients that I've talked with over time, none of them have said, oh, yeah, no, we don't care what our bottom line is. No, we don't care what that looks like. And so just thinking about, as an organization, how are you creating those opportunities for social connections? So we're going to take a little bit of a deeper look at this. And so we're going to look at how we foster those and then go into those 4 things. So we look at this, some things to consider before you look at those 4 strategies that I mentioned is to take a look and do some self-reflection. A lot of this, again, on a personal level and on an organizational level, involves a lot of reflection. If I may, and I can't see her here because I'm looking too hard, but the young lady that's president of the loading dock, if you're in the room, raise your hand. She mentioned earlier that they did a survey for their employees about how they were feeling and their well-being. And she said, it was hard to read some of the responses. And so as an employer, it's critical that you ask those tough questions and that you let your feelings be hurt a little bit because your people are telling you what they need. So do some reflection from the organizational level, but as an individual, you have to do your own reflection as well. What are your interests? What kinds of personalities are you naturally comfortable with? And so taking that time, I know I often forget to do some reflection and thinking about, I jump into a project. It's like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. And so just pausing to think about that, creating those opportunities. to work together. So looking at those 4 strategies that I mentioned. So here are the 4 strategies. Fostering connection, promoting open communication, engaging, encouraging collaboration and teamwork, looking for ways to get involved with others and building healthy relationships. Do any of these resonate with you as you look at them on the list? So when we foster connection, we continue to encourage teamwork. We're bringing people together and we're building healthy relationships so that we can be like the folks in this picture. I want them to be my workplace buddies, but please don't knock me out of the chair because that will not be fun to see. But again, thinking about your circles in the workplace, do you have folks that you connect with where you can be silly like this? One of the panelists in the opening session talked about her love for being silly. That is me. And I'm silly wherever I go, and I'm not apologizing for it because that is part of who I am. So finding your place, right? Finding your people that allows you to be authentic to who you are. All right, so let's take another look at promoting communication. Communication. You don't have to raise your hand here, but reflect on these questions. Do you think communication within your organization is good? Just thinking about that. Is that communication good between managers and their teams? What about between teammates? And then the 4th area is between departments or service lines. Oftentimes when I'm talking with clients, the first 2, they're like, yep, it's open communication between manager and the team. It's open communication amongst the team. But where we get silence is when we talk about communication between departments and service lines. Because God forbid that we have to talk to folks outside of our groups. Well, how do you get your job done if you're only talking to folks within your silos? So thinking about how you can promote that open communication. So looking at this first one is the only one there's 2 I'm going to talk about. The first one, be comfortable with silence. I do want to see a raise of hands with this. This is a safe space. We can all be vulnerable. Who is comfortable with silence? All right. I didn't raise my hand, notice, intentionally, because I'm not. All right, so for those of you who are not comfortable with silence like me, it is okay. Here's the thing about silence. It is one of the best gifts that we can give somebody. Because as we're having conversations, as we're engaging with folks, listen to listen, don't listen to respond. And sometimes that means just sitting quiet, right? One of the things that I've gotten really good at, because I like to fill the void, especially when I'm doing all of these 5,000 Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, I take hydration breaks. It allows me to pause and it keeps me hydrated. Beautiful idea. So thinking about that, one of the groups, the table that I was at in the last session about the water cooler, we were talking about loneliness in particular, and communication came up. And one of the things that stood out to me as we were talking about that was we're so quick to go from Zoom or Teams meeting to Zoom to Teams meeting, and we jump right in. But I invite you to think about, in terms of the open communication and creating that connection, before that meeting agenda starts, it may be 15 items long. Number 1, that should be 2 meetings, first and foremost. But before you start that meeting, check in with your people. Here's an example. In the height of the pandemic, I worked for the state of North Carolina. And we were on a Teams meeting one morning, and our managers, we were a small team of 4 people, and she's like, how are y'all doing? And nobody said anything. Because we were like, first of all, we just glad y'all let us go home to work. Didn't make us come downtown. But I'm not going to tell you how I'm feeling. And so she sensed the silence. She read the room. People don't always read the room. As managers, as leaders, we have to read the room. And again, step back out of your feelings and follow what your people are telling you. And she said to us, how are y'all doing? Again, and nobody said anything. And so she stopped and leaned into her computer and said, I'm struggling. I hate not being in the office with y'all. I feel like I don't have any structure. And as soon as she was vulnerable, the rest of us, it was like the weight was lifted. We all started sharing. So before you go into those meetings, start those meetings, check in with people just to see how they're doing. It's okay if you can't get through your 15 items, you can send a follow-up email or schedule another meeting. The second one that I'll talk about here is the last one. Be helpful with your language without telling people how they should feel. My mama would say, what you shoulda, coulda done. Make it about them and not about you, right? Give reassurance to folks as you're having conversations without giving advice, unless they ask for advice. Think about a time when you may have shared something with someone at work or even in your personal life, because this applies to personal lives too, where you were just kind of talking things through, and they immediately went into telling you what you should do, how you need to fix it. Now, I know how my face is set up. I'm usually like, I ain't asked for all that. Anybody else? Right? And so, again, reflecting and thinking about how you're showing up in conversations. And when you have somebody that's offering that information, you know, say, thank you. I appreciate that. But I really just needed somebody to listen. It's okay to do that. One of the things that my girls have taught me, I have 21-year-old twin girls, and I learn a lot from them. Earlier in their lives, it was always coming to mama with a question or problem. Mama goes into fix-it mode. And then I started getting stressed, and I was like, okay, wait a minute, this is not working. And one day, one of my daughters, who's kind of like her mama, says, I don't need you to fix anything, I just need you to listen. I was like, bet, I can do that. Right? So we often put stress on ourselves when we're communicating because we're anticipating what we think they want. Ask them what they need. And so when you're communicating with folks about your own stuff, start the conversation with, I just need to share my thoughts. I don't need you to respond, or I don't need you to give me any advice. Let them know what you need from them. But don't avoid telling people what they should do and what they ought to do. Collaboration. I love this graphic because I think it really summarizes it. We've talked about collaboration in all of these areas throughout the day. At the center of collaboration is trust. If you don't have trust, you're not going to build social connection. People are going to feel lonely if they can't trust you. So be authentic and think about how you can intentionally build trust. And a lot of this evolves around creating a change in your organizational culture. And so really doing that hard work of pulling up the hood and looking underneath and saying, okay, yeah, we're doing all these great things, but we're not so good at these, and working on those things that you're not so good at. Because once we have trust, we'll see that teamwork, we'll see communication improve, people will be motivated, it will lead to inspiration and success for the organization. And your people will be successful in the communities that they're part of. So thinking about collaboration. So looking for ways to get involved with others, I'm going to go ahead and bring these up. Right. Research shows us that we can have our links to others can have powerful effects on our health. Right. Some of the data has already been shown. When you registered for this event, if you read the little description, they quoted some of the data from the Surgeon General's report that talked about that. So if you didn't read it, go back and take a look at it, or just Google Surgeon General's report on loneliness. So we know that that connection is there. It helps our employees have a sense of belonging, and it connects the values of the organization back to the community. So you'll see some examples here of things that you can do. The last one should really be the first one. Partner with Activate Good if you're not already doing that. Right. So it really connects to social well-being and the power of connection in the workplace. Not only building that community and connection amongst your teams, but taking it outside of the four walls of your organization and into your local communities that you're embedded within. All right. These healthy relationships. Couple of things that I'll say about that without doing an informal TED Talk, Sarah. I won't do that. But healthy relationships, we've got to be honest with our feelings. Often, and the way that we can be honest, the way that folks are going to be honest is they have that trust. You may have heard a lot over the last few years about psychological safety. At the core of psychological safety is trust. If folks don't trust you, they're not going to share their feelings with you, and you're not going to have healthy relationships. Ask for what you need from others. Try to compromise, and then set boundaries. Here's the thing about boundaries. Does anybody think that boundaries are a form of self-care for yourself? Raise your hand. Absolutely. And saying no without guilt, it takes time to get there. but having those boundaries about what you can and can't do. And sometimes saying no just means no, not right now. It doesn't mean no forever. I had an individual that I've been friends with professionally for about 15, 20 years. She reached out to me. She's like, "Oh, I want you to be on this board. We've got this." Somebody mentioned this example earlier. And I was like, "Oh, I know exactly what that feeling is." And she's like, "We've got this board. I'm rotating off as a chair, and I think you'd be a great candidate." And I was like, "She's like, will you sign? Will you be a board member? Can I test y'all out first? I know what the organization is, but let me go to a board meeting to see how y'all really vibe, right? Because I know you, but I don't know everybody else on the board." And so I attended a board meeting and, felt really good about it. Took a tour of the organization, okay, and did some evaluation. And I came back and I was like, I can't do it right now. Doesn't mean no forever. It just means not right now. And she was okay with that. And I was not sad that I said no, not right now, right? Because you can only do so many things in life, right? And I was already on another board, and I was like, I'm trying to get these kids out of college. I'm trying to live my best life as a semi-empty nester. I don't want to fill up all my empty time doing good in other places. So I got to save some of that. So setting those boundaries and decide what you are and are not willing to do. All right, one of my last slides, and we'll wrap up. I love this slide, and the reason I close with this, I use this in almost every presentation, because as we think about the power of connection, as we think about trust, oftentimes when we notice this negative forward-facing behavior, and I'm going to try to step out of your way, we see anger. Replace that with any other negative forward-facing behavior. How many of us, and you don't have to raise your hand for this, think to pause and ask yourself, what is that? What's driving that behavior? Or do we immediately react to the anger or the frustration? Most of us as humans will react to that negative behavior. When we feel it in ourselves, we're like, whoa, I don't like that. And we try to avoid it. What I encourage you to do is sit with that if you're feeling it yourself, because our emotions tell us whether we need to reach out to somebody for support, right? We need to lean into those connections that we have, and it lets our other connections know when they need to lean into us. So don't push those emotions down. Sit with them. Think about what's driving the behavior. And if you see a negative behavior in somebody else, don't negatively react. Pause and ask them, what's going on? I've noticed this. It could be any one of these things. This is not all inclusive, but it could be any of those things that we see.